Hi everyone, my name is Miguel Serrato. I come from a background in business strategy and marketing, so I tend to look at these topics from a very practical perspective. I'm particularly interested in how concepts like CSR actually works in real business environments, especially in contexts like Colombia. So my position might be a bit critical, but it comes from experience. In the first place, I think it's very difficult to talk about corporate social responsibility in a country like Colombia, and honestly, even bringing authors like Porter and Kramer into this conversation can feel disconnect from reality, because the reality here is very different. According to national statistics, around 60% of employment in Colombia is informal. That means most people are not even working within companies. They have the structure to think about CSR, and even among formal business, the situation is fragile. More than 17% of new companies don't survive their first 5 years, and a large percentage don't even make it in past the first two. So we are not talking about a stable organization, we are talking about companies trying to survive, companies that struggle with cash flow, companies that sometimes can't even pay salaries on time. So how can we realistically expect them to prioritize social responsibility? So in Colombia, when we talk about CSR, we're really talking about a very small group of companies. Large corporations like Bancolombia or Grupo Nutresa, companies with strong financial structures, with the ability to invest in sustainability, and even create entire departments dedicated to CSR. But that's not the norm, that's the exception. Now, if we go back to the theory, Carol talked about CSR as a pyramid where economic responsibility is the foundation. And I think that's exactly the point. If a company is not economically viable, everything else collapses. Even Porter and Kramer, when they talk about share value, assume that the companies already have the capacity to create about economy and social value at the same time. But what happens when companies are still struggling to create economic value in the first place? That's the gap between theory and reality. So maybe the problem is not the CSR itself, maybe the problem is when we are trying to apply it. Because responsibility requires stability, and without a solid operational structure, CSR becomes more of an ideal than a real practice. So in contexts like Colombia, CSR should not be the starting point. It should be the next step after survival. Now, on the second point, how CSR contributes to vision and profitability, I do think it adds value, but only under certain conditions. And I want to use a recent case in Colombia to explain this. Right now, there is an ongoing investigation involving a well-known retail brand, Lily Pink, because authorities have identified a possible network of contraband, fake companies, and fraudulent VAT refunds, where companies simulate operation to request money back from the government. This scheme allegedly includes not existent suppliers, fake invoice, and even corruption inside public institutions. We are talking about a structured system, not a small mistake. And this is not an isolated case. Contraband in Colombia represents billions in losses every year and is deeply connected to corruption and informal practice. So here is the uncomfortable question. How do we talk about CSR in an environment where part of the business model may depend on avoiding the system? Because this changed everything. From a theoretical perspective, Carol explained the economic responsibility is the base of the CSR. And Porter and Kramer argue that companies can create share value by aligning business success with social impact. But both perspectives assume something fundamental, that companies operate within the rules, that value creation is legitimate. But what happens when the system itself is fragile, or when companies bend to rules to survive or compete? In that context, CSR risks becoming a narrative, not a reality. Now, going back to profitability, I do believe CSR contributes to business, but not at the beginning. CSR is not what builds a company. It's what strengthens its one is already built. When a company has a stable revenue, clear governance, and a long-term vision, then CSR becomes a strategic asset. It builds trust, is a strength brand perception. It creates legitimacy. But before that, before stability, CSR can easily become cosmetic. Something you say while the real business operates differently. So I don't see CSR as a driver of profitability in early stage. I see it as something that applies value once the company is already solid. Because in the end, CSR doesn't create the foundation. It reveals how strong that foundation really is.